Empathetic listening. Hope you're all listening empathetically to me, not ready to shoot me. I have been in correspondence with a god brother of mine who I could say is an acquaintance. I don't personally know him that much, didn't have that much personal interaction with him ever. Of course, we're related eternally. All jivas are related eternally at the lotus feet of Lord Sri Krishna. Mamai vangsho jiva loke jiva bhuta sanatanaha. We're all eternally related with Krishna, and particularly my glorious god siblings, always eternally related under the shelter of Srila Prabhupada's divine, glorious lotus feet. But in this lifetime, I haven't had much interaction with him, as with most of my god siblings. But it doesn't matter, there's plenty of time in future. Eternal time. Anyway, he's been expressing to me in various mails, as have quite a few god brothers, how he just can't relate to the present. ISKCON feels left out, not wanted, and that's not the topic of what I'm going to, that's not particularly or centrally the topic of, or it leads into the topic that he wrote in another letter, which I'm going to quote from. And the letter is about empathetic listening and some courses he took that in which empathetic listening was central to those courses. Okay, so I'm going to read from a letter he recently wrote to me. I took a course in non-violent communication. Wow, that's a statement in itself, isn't it? Non-violent communication, that implies that a lot of our communication, how we deal with others, how we talk with others, has an inherent violence in it. The great majority of our communication, the vast majority of our communication with others doesn't have physical violence in it. That's unusual, physical violence, but it's implied that the norm to take a course in nonviolent communication, or even to use that term, implies that the norm for communication is violent. That means it's beset with trying to dominate others, put them down. I would guess that. And that it's so deeply ingrained in us that we require to take courses to rectify that. So that's quite a statement in itself to say I took a case in nonviolent communication. It's in itself quite a condemning term, nonviolent communication. All right, let's start again. The reading from his letter. I took a course in nonviolent communication, and I learned there are ways of expressing ourselves to one another without creating, quote, roadblocks to communication, unquote, by practicing empathy with one another. Practicing empathy, that again suggests that the norm is to not be empathetic. I learned, he continues, that there are at least 24 ways of preventing a flow of communication by criticizing, preaching to, distracting, sympathizing, with one another. Sympathy is also counted as a roadblock to communication. Sympathizing, etc., with another, but not giving the empathy that is required to actually understand them. So it suggests that the sympathy, even sympathy, can be superficial. Seek first to understand, then to be understood. I get it, he writes, but are our ISKCON communities like that? Not from my experience, he writes. The orders are given coming down the pipeline, and do as you are told and don't question authority because you will be seen as an upstart or ISKCON critic or persona non grata. Each time I took the course, which was 3 times for the fundamental and 1 time for the advanced course, which included the fundamental, I was saddened toward the end because I realized the high level of empathy we had developed with one another during the 8-hour-a-day, 7-day workshop would soon be over, and I knew of no other place where that level of communication existed. This also included homework for us to do every night after a solid 8 hours a day of learning communication principles. It was very intense and very eye-opening. By the way, this course is run by a devotee, and I'm not sure, but I would suspect that the courses that this devotee attended was attended by other devotees. Mostly, wholly, I suspect that. He continues, I learned that taking the time to really understand another devotee and why they think or act the way that they do is rare. I find a void when it comes to empathy in ISKCON. A void. Wow, that's a big word. No empathy whatsoever. Very few devotees really know how to listen to one another. We say bhakti begins with shravanam, but have we really learned to listen to one another? Do we think that hearing is just a robotic process? Have we learned to read between the lines of what someone is actually saying to us, or learned to study their body language? Oops, better get my body language in order here. Yeah, the lizard says so also. Have we learned to become open to hearing one another's views and validating one another, even though we don't agree with them, but can understand that certain experiences have shaped them the way we are, or the way they are? I have rarely experienced this. We have not learned to agree to disagree and maintain friendship simultaneously. Okay, some thoughts from myself on that. Which may not be totally empathetic with what my godbrother here has expressed. Maybe I need to take an empathetic listening course to really understand what he's saying. But my first response to this was that this topic of empathetic listening, I don't find that it's stressed in Shastra. We're supposed to take knowledge from Shastra. There's some indication, is there, in that we should be empathetic to others. Empathetic listening exactly is not stressed, but empathy, yes, we have in Gita. Lord Krishna states that the highest yogi, Lord Krishna describes the highest yogi as follows: Atmopam yena sarvatya samam pashyati Arjuna sukham va yadi va dukam sayogi paramomataha. He is a perfect yogi who, by comparison to his own self, sees the true equality of all beings in both their happiness and their distress, O Arjuna. So it gives the idea that this statement of Lord Krishna's gives the idea that we see others have happiness and distress. We experience ourselves, we have happiness and distress. So we should consider all living beings equally, that they also have happiness and distress. Then again, a verse which is from Lord Kapila's teachings in Canto 3 of Bhagavatam, which Srila Prabhupada quoted often as a description of the qualities we can expect in a saintly person. Titikshava karunikaha suhrida sarvadehinam ajata shatrava shanta sadhava sadhubhushanaha. The symptoms of a sadhu are that he is tolerant, merciful, and friendly to all living entities. He has no enemies, he is peaceful, he abides by the scriptures, and all his characteristics are sublime. So again, although empathetic listening is not specifically recommended or even mentioned in this verse, it gives the idea that one should be, a saintly person should be empathetic toward others. Getting back to the letter written by my godbrother, with all due respect, it didn't sound very empathetic, or maybe I'm misunderstanding. I didn't take an intense course in empathetic listening, but it sounded like you, talking to that devotee, who may or may not listen to this or care what I have to say, but it sounds like blaming others. Why aren't they empathetic? Maybe they all need to take that course. Maybe. But that training that you had in empathetic listening seems to be, although it's intense, it seems to be useless if you can't take it beyond the classroom. If it's only in a classroom for a few days with a small group, then it doesn't seem to have much practical application in life. The traditional approach in Krishna consciousness, or especially that Srila Prabhupada emphasized, and Krishna emphasizes in Gita, is to first of all properly understand things. In fact, that was Arjuna's problem, wasn't it? He was being sympathetic or empathetic. They're two closely related terms and concepts. Arjuna was being very sympathetic to the other party who he had come there for the sake of killing. And now Arjunas were being very sympathetic. And it seems, I suppose everyone, when they first read Gita, they have this experience that seems like Arjuna's right. And it comes as a shock when Krishna he slaps Arjuna, not physically. Arjuna was speaking in terms of sympathy and being good, and what Arjuna said, Krishna, didn't seem that Krishna was listening very empathetically. Krishna told him, Anarya, klaibyang masmagama partha. You're just like a eunuch. Krishna insulted him. Anarya jushtam. This is not proper for a respectable person to talk like this. So Krishna didn't seem to be very empathetic, but Krishna's point was that first thing you have to understand siddhanta. You have to understand things as they are. That's the basis on which we can discuss as Aryans, as civilized people. The basis on which we can discuss, Krishna says, the first thing is not empathy with others. The first thing is to understand our existential position. And from that comes empathy on the spiritual platform. when we understand that everyone in this material world is suffering due to their ignorance of their existential position in relationship with Krishna, then we can empathize on a realistic platform. Otherwise, we may be empathetic, like Arjuna was empathetic. Arjuna was, but it was on the platform of ignorance, which was not going to help the people who he was trying to be empathetic with, and it wasn't going to help himself either. Krishna convinced Arjuna in a manner that is counterintuitive, that if you really want to help these people, you're going to have to kill them. What? Yes, you're going to have to act under Krishna's direction. If you let them live, which anyway Krishna wasn't going to let them live, if you let them live, then they will simply perpetuate their perfidy. And Bhishma and Drona were included in this because they were supporting the wrong party. They should not be allowed to live. But if they die in Krishna's presence, that will benefit them. They'll get liberation. And Krishna's desire will be fulfilled, that the saintly Yudhishthira will become the king. So the first thing to understand is what is correct, what is right and what is wrong, according to what Krishna says. We put so much stress on I want to be understood individually, but we ourselves don't understand who we are individually unless we understand that we're a servant of Krishna. And listening to people who are expressing what they feel on the mundane platform is only reinforcing their illusion. Therefore, like Krishna, it's sometimes, not in all cases, the sadhus speak very strongly to break through that illusion. How far do you take this empathy for others? You have empathy for human traffickers? I wouldn't listen to them empathetically. We hear complaints about governments all over the world. I have one complaint. All the governments should get together, track down all the human traffickers and shoot them all. That's what I think. It's grossly demoniac, human trafficking. And that's just one example. Should we have empathy for them? I don't think so. Another point that came to my mind is that within human society, we require leaders to organize people to get things done. First of all, they have to see what needs to be done, clearly understand what needs to be done, and organize people to get them to do it, which includes telling them what to do. You can't sit around with everyone all the time and empathetically listen to what they think should be done. Some people, they're gifted by the grace of God with what we call leadership skills. They can see what needs to be done and how to do it. There are leaders and there are followers. And a wise leader consults wise men. That's the Vedic system. Kshatriyas, they consult the Brahmanas. They consult wise men, not just anyone. We don't empathetically listen to someone who is in the mode of ignorance, who doesn't know what is good for himself, let alone what for others. Leaders have to lead. Now, in the modern, free, Western world, you can't force others to follow, especially in a voluntary organization, the religious organization of which we are members. You can't force people to follow, but you can if you can say that if you want to be a member of this organization, then you have to follow such and such and such. And there is a hierarchy. And those who are in leadership roles, they have the prerogative to consult who they want to consult according to their judgment. Those who are not in leadership roles, they may also want to get their voice heard, but that's very much part of our modern Western society or outlook, that everyone should speak and free speech and everyone should say, have a say, what do you think, what's your opinion? But it becomes cacophonic when everyone wants to express their opinion. And that's maybe one of the banes of the internet age, that everyone, there's a saying, opinions are like backsides. Everyone's got one. It's nothing special to have an opinion. But a well-informed, reasonable opinion, that's not so common. And even there may be so many opinions, but ultimately you've got to get things done. Okay, the room needs cleaning. It needs to be cleaned. That our guru is coming, the room needs cleaning. So let's all sit around and discuss empathetically with each other who should clean the room. And just forget it. Okay, you do it. That's all. Okay, forget it. You don't want to do it? I'll give it to someone else and do it. That's all. It may not. When you've got to get things done, just like in the army, what are you going to do? You're fighting a war. You're going to sit around and empathetically listen to all the soldiers, what they have to say about everything. You have to take decisions. To get things done in this world, you can't always be empathetic. It just doesn't work. It's not practical. And yeah, you can't force people to follow, but if you are within an organization, you can set rules for people to be members of that organization. That doesn't mean that we should take advantage of the role of a leadership role to be nasty to others. But there are pros and cons of free speech. We see that China is becoming, in some ways, the dominant country in the world, where they don't allow free speech. That's another big discussion. There is a difference, by the way. We can complain about not having enough freedom and this and that, but the very fact that we're allowed to complain shows that we don't fear that we're going to get picked up by the secret police if we complain. It may come to that, but it's not like that in the whatever you want to call it, the functional democracies of the world. There is a difference between the functional democracies of the world and autocratic regimes, but that's another discussion. I'm just making the point that we may be overly expecting that others will empathetically listen to us. It may be part of the culture that we're raised in. Speaking is allowed. Will others listen to us? That's something else. Anyway, it is impractical to listen to everyone, and especially some people, they just go on and on and on, and they have nothing really very helpful to say. You can't spend your whole life indulging people in whatever they want to say. How about this example? There's a salesman comes to the door. He wants to sell us the latest, most fantastic rubber duck. And we're going to sit around empathetically listening to him, or a Jehovah's Witness comes. How do you deal with a Jehovah's Witness? You slam the door, right? It may not be, I don't know, in lockdown era. They may not be coming. The door-to-door salesman is one of the many people out of a job. Probably now it's online sales, whatever. But how much do you empathetically listen to someone who you know just wants to sell you something which you don't want to buy? Or some religious fanatic who says, the world is going to end in 3 days, repent, sinners. You have in London, Hyde Park Corner, Speaker's Corner. You can go and say any damn thing you like there. You stand on a box and blah, 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 scream as much as you like. But how many people are going to... Why should you listen? Now, I'm not saying that my dear godbrother who's making the point about empathetic listening, which I'm not giving a very empathetic response to, is like that he's a fanatic or any such thing. But I'm just trying to look at the whole topic in a broader sense. It's true that some people are impossibly unreasonable. And in fact, in a previous mail, this godbrother wrote to me about some of his godbrothers who literally made him sick with their unreasonable demands and their unreasonable behavior. Now, if you don't agree with them, they become very upset. Now, you may say, well, they should go for a course in empathetic listening, but from their point of view, you're being unreasonable because you don't listen to, or if you don't agree with them, you're being unreasonable. Am I like that? Maybe we're all like that to some extent. We naturally like to be in the company of those who have a similar outlook. And in fact, that's there even in the process of devotional service that's stated. Rupa Goswami in his Bhakti Rasamrita Sindhu states that we should gravitate toward the association of devotees with a similar outlook. And that particularly refers to those with a similar devotional inclination. But human psychology is very complex. And I don't think that empathetic listening is a silver bullet to solve all the problems of human psychology and human discord. It's utopian to think that we're going to make a better world by just like non-judgmental. That empathetic listening means presumably one of the central tenets of empathetic listening is being non-judgmental, respecting all opinions. It's utopian to think you're going to make a better world like that. Agree to disagree. Try getting an anti-abortionist to empathetically hear a pro-abortionist, or even to agree to disagree with him. There are certain positions which are so strongly held, and it's hard to have a middle ground. In America, we find that the politicians on their websites, they state what is their position on various issues. And one of them, you'll find in all the politicians, they'll say abortion. On the abortion, are they pro-life or pro-choice? And if you say that, you can't say, well, I'm not really decided, then you're not really supposed to be a politician, because a politician is supposed to be someone who has positions and is willing to represent positions. George W. Bush, I believe it was, has said that something to the effect, what was that? Certainty. Certainty has to be seen in the President of the United States. He can't. well, should we invade such and such a country? Not sure. Or we just discovered that there's a bunch of Chinese within our country. This is just the kind of thing they say. I'm not trying to make any political statement here, just trying to give some theoretical example. We just discovered that the Chinese are spying on us in so many ways. Well, let's give an empathetic listening to them. You've got to take some action. You've got to be, apart from the need of national security to take action, you also have to be seen to be strong in counteracting the enemy, which America has in the last few years decided that China is their enemy, an enemy. So what are we going to do to make the world better? Well, from the Krishna conscious point of view, which we are, after all, members of the Krishna conscious movement, we're not just talking in general terms about psychology and psychological techniques. What is required to improve the world is not specifically empathetic listening, although that can be a feature of an improved world under certain circumstances, not in the circumstance that Arjuna was when Krishna spoke Bhagavad Gita to him. But what is needed is a mass change of consciousness based on proper understanding. The world can become a better place if people have a proper understanding that we're all eternal servants of Krishna. And then from that, all good qualities will develop, according to the version of Prahlad Maharaj, who his father didn't give him an empathetic listening, and Nrsimhadev didn't give Hiranyakashipu an empathetic listening. And when Nrsimhadev came to kill Hiranyakashipu, Prahlad didn't say, wow, just a minute, God. First of all, you should give him an empathetic listening. You should give him a fair trial. No way, no fair trial. Just got ripped to pieces on the spot. So Prahlad Maharaj says, Yas yasti bhakti bhagavatya kinchana sarvari gunas tatra samasate suraha harava bhaktasya kuto mahan guna manoratena asati dhavato bahi. Persons who are selflessly devotees of the Supreme Personality of Godhead develop within them all saintly, godly qualities. It's a corollary of being a pure devotee of Krishna. Whereas non-devotees, even if they appear to have very good qualities, they're not really very good qualities because it's all on the mental platform. It can change. First of all, it's not on the real platform. Just like Arjuna's sympathy, he felt deep sympathy in his heart, no doubt. He was so much so he was trembling. He felt great sympathy. But that sympathy wasn't a great quality because it wasn't helpful to anyone, either himself or those who he misappropriately applied his sympathy to. Now, a change of consciousness in the world is required. Some people are committed demons. They can be reformed by Krishna consciousness. Dino hino joto chilo hariname udharilo ta shaki jagai madhai. Jagai and Madhai were great demons, but they were uplifted by the holy name given by Chaitanya Mahaprabhu and Nityananda Prabhu. So there may be many more. And there are others also who are such committed demons, as Prahlad Maharaj also says, who won't take to Krishna consciousness at all. Matena Krishna paratasvato va mito bibhadyeta grihavratanam adantago bhi vishatang tamisram punah punascharvita charvananam. Certain people they're just determined. I will never, never, never. I'm not going to surrender to Krishna. I'm not, never, never, never. I'll be ripped to pieces like Hiranyakashipu would be ripped to pieces by Nrsimha, but he would never surrender to Nrsimha. That came later, when he was reinstated in his constitutional position. But as Ravana again, and as Shishupal again, there was no discussion. Actually, with Ravana, there were many attempts to rectify him by Vibhishana and other family members, Kumbhakarna, by Mandodari, by Sita. There are many people tried to speak to him and reform him, but he would have none of it. And he got his head cut off, and 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 his head cut off. All 10 heads, because none of them would listen to good advice. So empathetic listening, it's just not going to work with some people. Some demons can be reformed. We're all demons in this material world. Practically, we all partake of the demoniac mentality. That's why we're here in this world. Some people can be reformed, but some people, even if you yell in all 20 of their ears, they're just not going to have anything of it. And the only cure for them is to be cut to pieces by the arrows of Lord Ram, if they're that fortunate. Otherwise, Anda Tamisra Pravishanti. They go to hell. What can you do? Again, human traffickers. What are you going to do with them? What are you going to say? What are you going to say to them? Empathetically listening. Yeah. Oh, demons. Another point is that if we stress so much, as if we who are so fortunate as to have received the knowledge of Krishna consciousness from Srila Prabhupada, if we stress so much on empathetic listening, that can stress so much on it without emphasizing. First thing is we have to follow what Krishna says. There is right and there is wrong. If we stress on empathetic listening without that, if we stress on that more than following what Krishna says, then there will be a tendency toward Mayavad, that all opinions are as good as each other. So freedom of speech. Freedom of speech? 2 + 2 = 22. A godbrother of mine sent me a link to a video. Actually, to tell the truth, I get sent many links for many things to watch, but most of them I don't watch, because how much of your time do you want to spend watching different things on YouTube? Well, thank you to all of those of you who are listening to what I have to say. I'm not trying to promote myself, although it's going on, no doubt, but I'm just trying to do my duty as a sannyasi disciple of Srila Prabhupada, to present the knowledge that he gave relevant to our present human situation. So, 2 + 2 = 22. There's a godbrother sent me a link to a video where, in the name of freedom of speech, a teacher was hired from her job because she insisted to the pupil that 2 + 2 = 4 and not 22. And because she didn't indulge him in that freedom of speech, she was fired from her job. It's a drama. It's not actually happening yet, although you never know with the way this madness of New Age madness has set in to the Western world, you never know. You can't call a spade a spade. There are problems with which you're not allowed to talk about because you're accused of racism, sexism, and thisism and thatism. Then, it's a kind of Mayavad. This idea that everything is, you should just listen to what everyone has to say. Everything's good. Everything's nice. I'm okay, you're okay. If it feels good, do it. Here's a quote from Carl Jung, who wasn't a devotee of Krishna. If he'd come a little later, he could have got the mercy of Srila Prabhupada. Whether or not he would be ready to take it is another question. Carl Jung stated that the shoe that fits one person pinches another. There is no recipe for living that suits all cases. In other words, we're all individuals, and we can't be stereotyped into one kind of pattern. Well, that's true in the sense that as eternal souls, parts and parcels of Krishna, we all have our own individuality eternally. But there is one formula that does suit all living beings, which is Krishna consciousness. However, Krishna very pragmatically recognizes that within this world, not everyone's going to be the same. And not everyone's going to accept Krishna consciousness. So Krishna very pragmatically and mercifully gives the varnashram system, in which there are, not that the varnashram system is tailor-made to each individual exactly, but there are various categories that people can fit into. Male and female are fixed at birth, although some males become eunuchs. Very few. But otherwise, whether to follow the path of karma or jnana or yoga or bhakti, who to worship various demigods or to worship Krishna, there is variety within that. It is recognized. But within the Varnashram society, it is also very much rule-based. Not that one can just change his mode of living. There's duty. One has to perform. The basic principle in Varnashram society, even for people who are not spiritually advanced, one has to perform one's prescribed duty. This is another central theme of Bhagavad Gita. In this world, everyone has to perform their prescribed duty. And if you don't do, there's no empathetic listening. You have to do it. That's all. It's like in the army. There's no empathetic listening. A soldier has to obey orders. So it's something like that. Now, having said all of this, I'm not wholly against empathetic listening. And I hope I do it to some extent myself. I remember hearing once from devotees in England, where I was allowed to join this movement, that Srila Prabhupada once, he was hosting Graham Hill, who was in Britain at that time a household name. He was a racing driver, Formula One racing driver. And for some reason, just because he was famous, the devotee Shyamasundar Prabhu was bringing various people to meet Prabhupada. Graham Hill, he was a racing driver. You don't expect him to be very intellectual or philosophical, and he wasn't. And as I was told by devotees, there is a recording of the conversation they had with Srila Prabhupada, but the way you don't get everything from the recording and the conversation. You don't see the facial gestures, the body language. I'm sure that's a lot discussed in the empathetic listening courses. that Srila Prabhupada was very empathetic with him. He listened to him. He discussed with him about racing and all this, although Prabhupada had no interest in this. And eventually Srila Prabhupada brought the topic to Krishna consciousness, that it's very dangerous and driving a car so fast. And eventually Graham Hill died in a racing accident. Cars weren't so safe in those days. There are other instances of Srila Prabhupada not being very empathetic at all in his listening. Very famous case is Srila Prabhupada with Cardinal Danielu, who Srila Prabhupada was aggressive with this cardinal, who was very open-minded about Krishna consciousness. But Srila Prabhupada was aggressive. Why are you killing animals? Another instance which comes to my mind is Srila Prabhupada's dealings with devotees who are unnamed in the transcription of this talk, but they were initiated disciples of Srila Prabhupada called Jamadagni and Kanupriya. And they were bringing what might seem to be very valid concerns to Srila Prabhupada. And Prabhupada, he was very dismissive of them. They brought concerns about, well, how do we preach? One of the things they said, we want to reach intellectual people. How do you explain to them that according to the Bhagavatam, the number of bodyguards in Dwaraka for Maharaj Ugrasena exceeded the present population of the earth? How do you explain that? It seems to be a valid question. Prabhupada dismissed it and said, why do you want to bring that point? Just don't deal with that point. Go to another point. Then they brought out more practical concerns about that's a practical concern, but pressing concern that a sannyasi within ISKCON had approached one devotee for a homosexual liaison. And Prabhupada, he was quite dismissive. He really didn't want to discuss. He said, well, you ask, he said, I've already dealt with so many things. You listen, you ask my leaders. And they said, well, we've asked your leaders and they don't have answers. That's why we're bringing it to you as your disciples. And one of the leaders was there, Rebati Nandan Swami. And he said that, I don't have answers. They've asked me and I don't have answers. That's why I'm bringing to you. So it seemed that Prabhupada was not very empathetic with them. He didn't like that one of them at least had a mustache, and Prabhupada took that as a sign that he wasn't following very strictly. And then the devotee said, well, when you were married, I'm married, and you were married and you had a mustache. And Prabhupada said, that was before I was initiated. And Prabhupada he wasn't empathetic. What I take from that is that Srila Prabhupada detected something in their attitude that he didn't like. And Prabhupada said that, well, the leader, the Ravati Nandan Swami said that, well, I can't answer. And then Prabhupada said, well, if my leaders can't answer, I also can't answer. It was a very choppy exchange. Krishna, he can also be pretty heavy. He deals with people differently. He's samoham sarva bhuteshu name dveshosti na priyaha. Krishna says, I see everyone as equal, but he does deal with everyone differently, specifically his devotees. Samoham sarva bhuteshu name dveshosti na priyaha. Ye bhajanti tumam bhaktya mai te teshu chapyaham. But Krishna says, I see everyone equally, but I really like my devotees. He seems to contradict himself. And, oh, that's a very big topic. He did. I want to discuss that in an upcoming talk, how Krishna sometimes seems to deal with his devotees in a very cruel way. How he dealt with the gopis, how Ram dealt with Sita, sometimes seems to be very cruel. Srila Prabhupada, I was making that point. Srila Prabhupada dealt with different people differently. Krishna deals with different people differently. Srila Prabhupada was very empathetic with Graham Hill, who really had no deep interest in what Prabhupada had to say. Although he didn't deal empathetically with Kanupriya and Jamadagni, who at least at some point in time did have deep interest in what Srila Prabhupada had to say, because they'd taken his teachings so seriously to the point that they became his disciples. Krishna is a Kalyana Kalpataru. He says, Kalyan Kalpataru means a desire-fulfilling tree. Or he's a wish-fulfilling tree that is for the benefit of everyone. And Krishna says, Akamo sarva kamo va moksha kama udaradihi tivrena bhakti yogena yajeta purusham param. Krishna says, whether you are desireless or you have full of desires, or you desire liberation, worship me, tivrena, intensely. But acharyas, they'll quote this from Bhagavatam, but they don't come to say, well, just whatever you do, however you like, you approach Krishna. That's not their general preaching, especially to those who become their disciples. Acharyas have to establish Sarvadhaman parityaja mamekam sharanam raja. Surrender to Krishna. An acharya cannot be everything to everybody or all accommodating. Then there's no meaning to him being a guru. He has to say, this is right, that is wrong, you are doing wrong. He has to tell people. He may listen to people with some, definitely he has empathy, but his empathy doesn't necessarily and often or usually doesn't manifest as what is being called empathetic listening. We should hear from our acharyas, not that we sit around listening to people blathering all their maya. Basically what we may say empathetically listening, but unless someone is self-realized, unless they have taken knowledge from the perfect source, then what they speak is, it's an expression of the present phase of false egoism, their present phase of false egoism, their present phase of illusion, identifying with this material world. Our process is to hear from people who know tadvidhi pranipatena pariprashnena seveya upadekshanti te jnanam jnaninas tattva darshinaha. Those who have seen the truth by hearing from those who know the truth, they should be approached in a humble mood, not that I have come to advise you, or I have come to tell you what I have to say. That was Arjuna's fault. He wanted to tell Krishna what he had to say. Krishna cut him. No, you should hear what he instilled in Arjuna the understanding. You should listen to what I have to say. We may say, well, people don't want to listen to us. How are we going to get people to listen? We have the message. How are we going to get people to listen? They don't want to listen to all these funny guys with bald heads and jumping around in funny cloth. They don't want to listen to us. Oh, we want to influence people with Krishna consciousness. Well, how about getting back to that book? What's it called? How to Win Friends and Influence People. Yeah, first of all, you have to make friends with people, then you can influence them. The thing is that on the mundane platform, how we win friends is superficial. Everything on the mundane platform, it's all superficial. When you say how to win friends, I did read that book years ago. And I remember an example how the author said, well, he was nice with the secretary to a big man in a big company when the author Carnegie, can't remember, Dale the Carnegie. I always get mixed up with that. Is that the same? That's not the same one who was the steel magnate from Dunfermline in Scotland. Maybe it is, I don't know. Anyway, Dale Carnegie, he gives an example. He was a small-time salesman, but he was nice with the boss's secretary who sat outside the boss's office. And being nice with her, he was able to, instead of saying, no, you gotta learn that, and say, yeah, I understand you have your job to do like that, and he complimented her and this and that. And she softened up, and eventually she married the boss, and that was a good business contact for him. So you can see his idea of making friends. It's not very deep or very sincere. It's very shallow. So empathetic listening, but we want to go beyond shallow friendship and meaninglessly influencing them. There are other ways to influence. The thing is, we want to influence people with Krishna consciousness. And although one of the ways to make a communication block, my godbrother has written, is to preach to them. But in certain circumstances, preaching to them, just as I'm preaching now, can take it or leave it. I'm saying this is the way things should be, but that is one way to influence others. Otherwise, what happens if we're always thinking, well, I have to get people to like me, and then we come down to their level of what they like, and then we come down to the level of being nice and saintly and sentimental, playing to the crowd. You speak whatever they want to hear instead of what they need to hear. You act and behave in a way that you think people think is very saintly. It becomes like a performance, so we can get claps from the audience. But because they're shallow and we're shallow, it's not going to touch their heart. It's not going to have the effect of bhidyate hridaya grantis chidyante sarva sangshayaha. It's not going to have the effect of piercing the heart and cutting all misconceptions. Having said all this, I hope I do myself deal with others empathetically. I don't know. We always tend to judge ourselves well and others badly. We're very generous with ourselves. So I could say, yes, I'm a very good empathetic listener. Yes, I'm very good empathetic. I don't know. But empathetic listening definitely has to be there also, in as much as, just like as a guru, I regularly hear complaints from disciples, one disciple against another, or one against a group of others. It's always good to hear both sides of the story. There are at least two sides to a story. It's about being fair rather than simply dismissing others. We should be fair. It's better than being boorish or priggish. At least we have to give people the benefit of the doubt. Although the benefit of the doubt can evaporate if we see there are some people who are repeatedly misbehaved. And it's very difficult to try to advise. I know devotees who always think they're right, and they expect that my role as a guru should be to just support them, and if I don't support them, they think I'm wrong too. Unnecessarily, it's sad to see that devotees they have such a strong, hard nature. They unnecessarily create enemies, and then they complain about the other people being enemies. And they may expect me as the guru to support them, and creating situations that divide them, when a more sober approach, such things could be avoided. Realistically, there are some people we're not going to get along with, although Srila Prabhupada, he gave the idea that the higher purpose should unite us. Srila Prabhupada told the fable or the story of the several sons of the father. They all went to massage the father, and then they were fighting over who should massage which part, and eventually they started fighting, and instead of massaging, they completely forgot about massaging the father, and instead they ended up fighting and falling on the father and giving physical as well as emotional pain to the father. So in the same way, the higher purpose should unite us. And when Prabhupada was present, he was able to keep his often warring disciples together. By his word, they would, at least for the time being, stop their ongoing fights. Empathetic listening. Well, I myself do speak outspokenly on various issues. I suppose one reason for that is that I had the same experience as this devotee who wrote this letter to me had, that when you try to point out in a polite way that something is to the leaders, in a polite and discreet way, you try to point out to leaders some concerns, and are dealt with in a very heavy-handed and totally unempathetic way. And when that happens repeatedly, then you start to make talks on YouTube discussing various issues within the society, issues like this. One particular thing going on at the present time is very dangerous. The FDG/VDG issue within ISKCON. I regret very much that there's never been any open discussion. Now, practically by force, there is some discussion going on behind closed doors. But we have on one side, I suppose why persons like myself who are on one side are not listened to is because the other side have decided that we are misogynistic. If we don't agree, misogynistic, and that is the official line from the GBC. It's on Dandavat's website, that a link to an article in which it said that those who don't support the female Diksha Guru proposals it's misogyny. So misogyny means you hate all women just because they're women, which means you're a demon. So they've decided we're all demons, and there's no use to even talk with us, to try to talk. So that's one side. And from the other side, the side that I'm on, we're saying that, well, these devotees, they're influenced by the contemporary liberal, what's it called, neo-Marxist outlook, cultural Marxism, false equality. It's not what Srila Prabhupada taught. Well, both sides are saying it's not what Srila Prabhupada taught. So I regret that there's been no real attempt to understand each other and just attempts to defeat each other by increasingly absurd intellectual gymnastics, and just getting down to all kinds of nitty-gritty and all kinds of details, missing the wood for the trees. Some empathetic listening might help. What I see, it comes down to there's a basic disagreement at the root level about how to understand Srila Prabhupada and his mission, what we should be doing in the world. But we're not discussing that, although hopefully on both sides of the issue there are... one reason why it's so heated or bitter, the debate, is because both sides, devotees, have committed themselves to Srila Prabhupada and his mission, but there's a very deep divide on what the manifestation of that mission should be. Maybe if there is open and empathetic listening, maybe it will just lead to a divide. I think it's going to lead to that anyway, one way or the other. At least we could have a what do you call that? A no-fault divorce or something like that. Agree to disagree, and good fences make good neighbors. Anyway, I'm just giving that as an example of how empathetic listening, if it was there, maybe we wouldn't have come to the precipice of the movement splitting. It's hard to have an institution with so many diverse outlooks. Srila Prabhupada was very strong-minded, and performing Bhakti sadhana does make you very strong-minded, and Srila Prabhupada had what we would call strong opinions, and instilled that in others. So yeah, it's hard to be in an institution where you've got all these strong personalities. Good fences make good neighbors. Yeah, what does that mean? You separate into distinctly different factions with where there are different rules on different sides of the fence. That's formalized agree to disagree. Well, did I give any answers? Krishna is the Supreme Personality of Godhead. Surrender to Krishna. Then everything will be nice. Will it? Well, even we find in Chaitanya Leela that Chaitanya Mahaprabhu is chastising his great pure devotees, Damodar Pandit, Jagadananda Pandit, for their indiscretions. Gopinath Patnaik has a quarrel with the son of, that's Purushottam Jana, the son of Maharaj Prataparudra. Maharaj Prataparudra was a great devotee of Krishna. So was his son Purushottam Jana. So was Gopinath Patnaik. But Gopinath Patnaik on one occasion spoke very insultingly to Purushottam Jana, and the fallout of that was that Purushottam Jana arranged for Gopinath Patnaik to be executed. It's going on in Chaitanya Leela. Chaitanya Mahaprabhu didn't listen empathetically to the pleas of the devotees who wanted him to save Gopinath Patnaik. Gopinath Patnaik wasn't at all empathetic with Purushottam Jana's valid claim that Gopinath was corrupt. And in response, Purushottam Jana didn't deal empathetically with Gopinaths. Human nature is such. Maybe it makes life a little more spicy, more fun. Everyone's all empathetic with everyone else, and we all just merge into the impersonal Brahman. Everything's boring. So what's I should give some kind of a conclusion. Conclusion, empathetic listening definitely has its place. First, we have to understand who we are, what is our eternal relationship with Krishna, what is our duty in our relationship with Krishna, and don't expect everything to be beautiful and wonderful, and let's all get on well together. Imagine all the people living for today, John Lennon's imagine, no religion and no religion too, and just some kind of hippie dream that everything will be nice. Empathetic listening, yeah, do we need training in it? Yeah, maybe. Not 7 days, 8 hours, and then you come out and it has no use in the world today. The training in Vedic culture is very practical. It's practical education. So certain people, Brahmanas, are trained in practical psychology, which doesn't mean that you're always empathetically listening. It's understood that the Brahmanas who are advising the king, they also have to detect who is an enemy of the king. They don't just presume that someone must be good. They don't start off with the premise that everyone is sincere. That is a very dangerous premise to start off with. Yeah, the lizard said also. So, empathetic listening, yes, but it's not the first consideration. First, we have to get clearly understand that we're supposed to surrender to Krishna. To get people to understand that they have to surrender to Krishna, we may have to deal with them empathetically. But empathetic dealing doesn't necessarily mean listening to all the nonsense that they have to say, as Krishna exemplified in his dealing with Arjuna. Hare Krishna. Vancha kalpatarubhyascha kripa sindhubhya evacha patitanam pavanebhyo vaishnavebhyo namo namaha. Dante nithaya chunakang padayo nipatya kritvacha kakushatameta bravime. Hey sadhava sakala eva vihaya duranga chandra charne kurutanuragaha. Parivadatu jano yata tata va nanu mukharo na vayam vicharayamaha. Harirasa madira madati mata bhuvi vilutama nartama nirvisham.